Hello, everyone. I am Mohammad Tavakkoli, the inaugural director of the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies at the University of Toronto. I welcome you all to another session of the Institute's Zoroastrian Studies Seminar Series featuring Professor Almut Hintze, who is speaking on the transmission of the Zoroastrian texts. I'm convening the series along with my colleagues, Professor Enrico Raffaelli and Professor Miguel Angel Andres Toledo. I'm grateful for the support of our sponsors, the Encyclopaedia Iranica Foundation, the Federation of Zoroastrian Associations of North America, and the Zoroastrian Society of Ontario. In addition, we are grateful to the Roshan Cultural Heritage Institute for fully funding the establishment of the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies at the University of Toronto. At the outset, I'd like to express our solidarity with the inspiring women's movement in Iran and our collective gratitude to Canada's Indigenous people and acknowledge this land on which the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of Credit River. Today, this meeting place continues to be the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live, learn, and teach on their ancestral homeland. I welcome Professor Almut Hintze of the University of London to the University of Toronto. My colleague, Professor Enrico Raffaelli, is introducing our distinguished speaker and will moderate the session. Professor Raffaelli.
Thanks, Professor Tavakkoli. Hello, everyone, both the people that I know and the people that I don't know. It is really a pleasure for me to introduce Professor Almut Hintze, a leading scholar in Avestan studies. Professor Hintze is Zartoshty Brothers Professor of Zoroastrianism at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, the academic institution where in the past Professor Mary Boyce taught. Professor Hintze has published a large number of important publications, mostly focused on the study of the Avesta. These publications include several books and numerous articles, among which I would like to remember her important book containing the edition and translation in German and English of the hymn Zamiyad Yasht, and more recently her book A Zoroastrian Liturgy, The Worship in 7 Chapters, containing the edition and translation of the Yasna of the 7 Chapters. Professor Hintze has supervised the research of a large number of students in Zoroastrianism and has a long history of close collaboration with the Zoroastrian and more specifically the Parsi community. I want to conclude this short introduction by mentioning her current research project, the Multimedia Yasna, which, as the name itself says, examines the current performance of the main Zoroastrian ritual, the Yasna, in parallel with the text that accompanies the ritual. Professor Hintze.
Well, thank you very much, Enrico, for this very kind introduction. And I would like to thank my hosts, my dear colleagues at the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies for inviting me to speak to you all today. And I would like to acknowledge the generosity and the gifts which have been made to the University of Toronto to support Iranian studies. It is a wonderful act which has been done here by Fezana and the University of Toronto and other benefactors who are listed in the Encyclopaedia Iranica Foundation, the Federation of the Zoroastrians of North America, that is Fezana, and the Zoroastrian Society of Ontario to support the study of this very important and very valuable tradition of Zoroastrianism. So I'm going to talk to you tonight on transmitting the Zoroastrian tradition. In the Samvat year 1377, on Wednesday, Kartika Sudi 14, on the Pravadin day of month Adar of the Parsi year 690, today, here in Tana, on the shore of the sea, at the time when Sultan Ghiyazuddin was establishing his way, the Parsi merchant Chahil, son of the Parsi merchant Sangan, having sent a letter full of compliments and an honorarium for copying, caused this book to be written for the merit of his soul by the Parsi priest Mihirwan, who came from the country of Iran land. Whosoever preserves or reads this book will reflect merit upon the merchant Chahil and also upon his ancestors whose souls have been liberated. This text comes from the oldest extant Zoroastrian manuscript, the Pahlavi Codex MK. The manuscript's name, MK, derives from the initials of its scribe Mihirwan Kai Husrav. Although this manuscript has survived to the present day, its last leaf with the Sanskrit text just quoted is sadly lost. Luckily, however, MK was copied in the year 1767 by Dastur Jamshed Jamasp Asa Faridun. This copy of MK is called JJ, after the scribe's name, and it was used in the early 20th century by Dasturji Jamaspri Jamasasana when he published the texts contained in the manuscript MK, which he owned. At that time, the last folio with a colophon or postscript in Sanskrit was already lost in MK, but Dasturji Jamaspri was able to supply the text from JJ, and this is how we know about the Sanskrit colophon. His publication, the Pahlavi texts of 1913, is the only existing witness of this Sanskrit colophon, because in the meantime, the manuscript JJ has also been lost, or at least we don't know where it is kept. Perhaps it is somewhere in the Karma Oriental Institute. The scribe's note in Sanskrit records the circumstances under which Chahil Sangan from the Gujarati seaport of Kambai invited and funded the learned Iranian Zoroastrian priest Mihraban, son of Kai Husrav, to travel from Sistan in Iran to India in the early 14th century in order to share his knowledge about Zoroastrian rituals and his skills in copying manuscripts. The Sultan referred to in the colophon is Ghiyas-ud-Din Tughlaq, the first ruler of the Tughlaq dynasty of the Delhi Sultanate. The colophon establishes a historically accurate synchronism between the early years of the Sultan's reign and the completion of this manuscript in 691 Anno Yazdigiad, which is 1322 of the Christian era. MK is one of, if not the oldest surviving manuscript which Mihraban transcribed upon his arrival in India. Since his name also appears in that of the scribe in the colophons of several other manuscripts copied in India, and possibly in 1321 and between 1321 and 1351, MK is so this is MK, which was copied, of course, in India. Now, Mihraban Kai Husrav's host and sponsor, Chahil Sangan, did not himself belong to the priestly class, but was a lay Zoroastrian. He nevertheless has contributed enormously to the preservation of the Zoroastrian tradition. For the interest which he took in sponsoring the copying of manuscripts proved vital for the survival of not only of these texts here, which are copied in MK, but also of the Avestan Yasna and Videvdat with their Pahlavi translations. Mihraban Kai Husrav's manuscripts are not only among the oldest extant manuscripts of the Avesta, but also the ancestors of all other surviving bilingual manuscripts of the Yasna and the Videvdat, where the Avestan text alternates with its Pahlavi translation. Now, the role which Jahil Sanghan plays in the history of the Zoroastrian tradition illustrates the mutual dependency between the Zoroastrian priesthood and the laity. Such a reciprocal relationship is most prominent in connection with the performance of rituals, in which members of the laity depend on the priests as the ritual experts. They engage the priests and hire them to perform the rituals on their behalf. The priests have the specialist knowledge required to perform rituals on behalf of the members of the laity. The merit for commissioning and funding a performance of a ritual, that goes on the account of the lay member who takes the role of the patron commissioning a ritual. The priests in turn derive their income from the rituals which they perform on behalf of members of the laity. At least this is how it used to be in the past. Patronage is thus a fundamental and widely recognized feature in the framework of Zoroastrian ritual practice. It forms part of a system of merit and rewards whose roots reach back far into the prehistoric Indo-Iranian period. Yet, the role which patronage has played in the written tradition of Zoroastrian manuscripts has attracted less attention so far. Copying manuscripts was a time-consuming, laborious, and expensive activity. In the colophons that are included in many of the manuscripts, the scribes usually state at whose request the manuscript was copied. Tonight we shall look at two instances in which the copying of manuscripts was commissioned by lay members of the community and explore the significance such commissioning had for the survival of the Avesta. Focusing on two of the oldest sponsors of whom we know, one from Iran and one from India, we will see that the engagement of the laity with the religious tradition and the funding of priests to copy manuscripts and travel between the communities of Iran and India proved vital for important manuscripts to be copied and preserved. We will also see that the colophons in the manuscripts include historical information which helps us to understand better the history of the Zoroastrians after the Arab conquest of Iran. In particular, we shall see that there was an important community of Zoroastrians in the Punjab around 1200 CE, and that the colophons of the manuscripts provide further support for the view that this community observed a traditional form of Zoroastrianism. One of the earliest patrons whose name is mentioned in the manuscripts is Mahda, the son of Adowe. He lived in Sistan around 1200 CE, that is some 100 years earlier than Jahil Sanghan. We know of him from the colophon of an Avestan manuscript of the Vidivdad. Like Jahil Sanghan, Mahda Adowe must have been a wealthy man. The colophon relates that he used some of his wealth to engage a priest of the name Ardashir, the son of Wahuman, to copy a manuscript which belonged to or was written by Hormazd. The work was completed in 554 Anno Yazdegerd, and that is either 1185 or 1205, and it was completed in Sistan. Now, the colophon also informs us that the manuscript was copied not for the sponsor, but for another person, a certain Mahya, son of Mahmihya. Thus, the triangle of exchange here also applies to the copying of manuscripts. The wealthy merchant Mahda asks the priest Ardashir to copy a manuscript and give that copy to Mahya. Through this action, Mahda, son of Adowe, accrues merit on his personal account, and that merit will help his own soul when it has to cross the Chinvat Bridge after death. This Mahya was a Zoroastrian priest from India, and he belonged to the community of Ucha in Punjab. From there, he was sent to Iran to obtain Avestan manuscripts for the Zoroastrians in the Punjab. As to the route which the Zoroastrians traveled between Sistan and the Punjab, it is likely that Mahia traveled from Ucha to Sistan via the Bolan Pass and Quetta, and from there to Kandahar and the Helmand Basin. So it would, can you see my cursor? Would have been here. Can you see my cursor? Via Quetta, and from
Yes.
there to Kandahar, and then from there onwards to Sistan. That was the preferred route, is explicitly stated in the Rivayat, in a Rivayat of 1478 of the Iranian priest Nariman Hoshang, inviting 2 Zoroastrian priests from India to visit Iran via the land route as proper for a priest. If possible, it is necessary that 2 wise Herberts may come over here, that's to Iran, to learn the Pahlavi language and know the proper and the improper, and then attend to the religion of Ormuzd over there, that's in India, and be energetic in doing meritorious deeds so that they may attain to Garodman, the best existence and the abode of paradise, of the pious. The way by land is nearer, and from Kandahar to Sistan is the nearest way, and there is no danger on the road from Sistan to Yazd. So here you can see the Helmand Basin, Kandahar is here, and the road towards Sistan, and then onwards from Sistan, you can see here that's still quite a way to Yazd, and there is also Kerman. Around 1200, the city of Ucha in the Punjab must have had a sizable Zoroastrian community. Zoroastrian present in the Punjab, in particular in the area of Multan, has a long history and is attested from the 3rd century of the Christian era. Such a presence is unsurprising, considering that the Kushan and Heptalite empires included both what is today Afghanistan and Pakistan. The Greek author Ptolemaeus, who lived around 150 CE, mentions that priests called Brahmanoi Magoi were present in India at this time, and sources in Sanskrit, particularly the Puranas, refer to the Maga Brahmanas in the region of Multan in the Punjab. They are presented in Hindu terminology as a class of Brahmans from a distant continent called Shakadvipa, the land which scholars identify with Sakastan or Sistan. Iranian, indeed Zoroastrian provenance of the Maga Brahmanas is indicated by their use of the sacred girdle, transcribed in Sanskrit as Avyanga, which has been interpreted as a Sanskrit rendering of Avyonghana, the Avestan word for the sacred girdle worn by the Zoroastrians. The texts also mention the Sanskrit word patidana, which corresponds to the Avestan word paitidana, the mouth sheet of the Zoroastrian priests, and varshman corresponding to Avestan barsman. Moreover, Professor Antonio Panaino has noted that the Sanskrit Puranas attest for the Maga Brahmanas the list of 30 yazatas, just as the Zoroastrian calendar does. That there were not only priests, but also Zoroastrian families emerges from an early Buddhist text of the 2nd century of the Christian era, which speaks of barbarians, that's Mlecha, in the West, who are called Magas. It ascribes to them the view that there is absolutely no sin in behaving lustily with one's mother, daughter, elder, or younger sister, daughter-in-law, or the like, a description which fits the way outsiders perceived Zoroastrian marriage customs known to us from the Sasanian period. The latter are mentioned repeatedly and with disapproval also in other Indian Buddhist sources and elsewhere. Thus, Zoroastrian presence in India and in the Punjab especially goes back well into pre-Sasanian times. The colophon of our manuscript takes us to the 12th century. It testifies to a Zoroastrian community in Ucha that observed the rituals and their interpretation as we know them from the mainstream Zoroastrian tradition. Indeed, the survival of the Pahlavi Videvdat is thanks to the activities of the community in Ucha in the Punjab and the Sistani merchant Mahda in particular, who funded the copying of that manuscript for the Indian community. According to our colophon, Mahya, the Zoroastrian priest from Ucha, traveled to Sistan in order to obtain a copy of the Pahlavi Videvdat, which at the time was no longer available among the communities of India, and he returned to Ucha with Ardashir Vahuman's copy. This manuscript is now lost, but what has survived to the present day are copies of it. And these are the manuscripts L4 and K1, written by Mihraban Kai Husrav in 1323 and 1324, respectively. The entire extant Pahlavi Videvdat descends from those two manuscripts, and we would know nothing about its early history was it not for these two copies that were made from Ardashir Vahuman's manuscript. In the colophon of K1, Mahda Adawe's benefaction is recorded as follows. That's the manuscript, had been written in the land of Sistan, following the order of the master of profound skill, whose soul shall be immortal, Mahdad, son of Adawe, son of Denya. From his own wealth, he had made the expenditure for the benefit of Mahyar, son of Mahmihir, a priest from India, from the city of Ucha, which is on the bank of the water of Sindh, which in the religious text is called the Good River. For 6 years, he was near the Arbads of Sagastan, and through him some religious matter was learned and came to Hindugan. And this register, anti-demon law, with explanation, came to this side through him. And he had acquired it there, that's in Iran, as a religious gift, an ashudat. Thus, Mahda, the son of Adawe, is described as a master, an ustad, who used his personal resources to employ the priest Ardashir, the son of Vahuman, to copy the Pahlavi Videvdat in Sistan. And he had it transcribed for the priest Mahya, son of Mahmihir, who had traveled to Sistan from the city of Ucha, located on the banks of the river Sindh. And the tradition of the Indian Pahlavi Videvdat thus descends from that one manuscript brought to India by Mahya, son of Mahmihir. Now, the Pahlavi Videvdat also continued to be transcribed in Iran, but the only witness of which we know today was copied from the same original as the one which was taken to India. So all our transmission of the Pahlavi Videvdat goes back to that one manuscript. Now, this other copy is the manuscript called IM, copied in Kerman in 1575. And this manuscript too eventually found its way to India. According to a note in Persian appended to the last folio of the Persian a Persian Zoroastrian named Siavash, son of Omidyar, brought IM from Kerman to India and presented it as a gift to the wealthy noble Manekji Sorabji Kavusji Ashburna in 1853 CE, along with the Iranian Bundahishan manuscript DH. Manekji Sorabji Kavusji Ashburna and his brother Burjorji Sorabji Kavusji Ashburna were the grandson of Kavasji Manekji Ashburna, a successful Bombay Parsi businessman who may have taken his surname from his previous employer, Luke Ashburna, whose business he purchased in 1817. The two Ashburna brothers were avid collectors of manuscripts. While Burjorji donated his collection to the India Office Library in London, Manekji gave his manuscript to the learned Dastur Hoshank Jamasp of Pune. After the Dastur's death in 1908, his collection of manuscripts seems to have been dispersed. His Iranian Unterhischen manuscript DH found its way into the library of the Kama Atonan Institute in Andheri, and my research team was fortunate enough to locate the manuscript there in 2017. I would like to take this opportunity to express my profound thanks to the trustees of the Kama Atonan Institute for not only giving us access to their valuable collection of manuscripts, but also for allowing us to make a catalogue and take images of their collection. Sadly, the current location of IM is unknown, if it still exists at all. Fortunately, however, Dastur Hoshang used it in his edition of the Pahlavi version of the Videvdat and records its manuscript readings, and that's where that Persian colophon comes from. Moreover, the Pahlavi version of IM survives interlinear, written between the lines of the Avestan text in the Videvdat Sadeh manuscript, that is a manuscript which describes a performance of the Videvdat ritual in Tehran, that is in the Tehran University Library, TU1, which has been made available by Professor Kantera. This manuscript was written in Sharifabad in 1617 or 1637 by Fredun Marstan Fredun Vahrum Rustam Bunda Sharmanda Dinya, the son of the scribe of IM. Now, Dastur Hoshang Jamas's edition of the Pahlavi Videvdat also reproduces the three colophons of IM in the original Pahlavi script, accompanied by an English translation. Colophons 1 and 3 both state that IM was copied in Kerman in 1575 by Marsban Fredon Vahrom. Marsban Fredon Vahrom belonged to an illustrious priestly family in Kerman, whose members have copied a large number of important Avestan and Pahlavi manuscripts. The family had migrated to Kerman from Khorasan. Marsdan Fredon Vahrom copied IM from a copy of Shahryar Ardashir Eris, who in turn copied a manuscript from Vijan Bahram Shah Vijan. And he did so for his grandson, Adurgajas Yazdagar Vijan Bahram Shah. We can see from the names that Adurgajas Yazdaya Vijan must be the grandson of Vijan Bahram Shah Vijan. As you can see from the names, there are Yazdagard was the son of Vijan and Adurgajas was the son of Yazdagard. So there is a mini genealogy here. And that means that two generations, maybe 60 or even more years, lie between the copy of Shahryar Ardashir and that of Vijan Bahram Shah Vijan. Now, Dastur Shahryar Ardashir's lifetime, in turn, can be established on the basis of the letters or rivayat exchanged between the communities of Iran and India. There, his name appears as a signatory of the community in Khorasan in a rivayat dated 1538. Thus, Shahryar Ardashir's copy must have been taken from Khorasan to Kerman, and because IM was copied in Kerman. Now, at some point in the decades following Mahia Mahmiher's return to Ucha in the Punjab, the manuscript which he had brought from Sistan to India must have found its way to Gujarat, because Rustam, the son of Mihraban and great-granduncle of Mihraban, Kai Husraf, copied it there in the late 13th century. Rustam's colophon provides no information concerning the reason for his journey to India, except that he copied the manuscript for his own purposes. By contrast, his great-grandnephew Mihraban Kai Husraf traveled to India at the explicit invitation of Chahil Sangan. This is stated in the colophon quoted at the beginning of this talk and in other colophons of the manuscripts copied by Mir-Djalali. The city of Kambad, or Kambai, where Chahil Sangan resided, is mentioned in the Keseye Sanjan as one of the places in India where Zoroastrians settled. Located at the head of the Gulf of Kambai and the mouth of the Mahi River in northwestern Gujarat, it was one of the two most important and prosperous ports of India and was famously noted as a busy harbor by the Venetian traveler Marco Polo in 1293. Now, Chahil Sangan is described as a merchant, and he is likely to have been of considerable wealth. Just like his counterpart Mahdad Adawi in Sistan a century and a half before him, he used his wealth to promote the study of the Zoroastrian scriptures and the copying of manuscripts. The surviving manuscripts copied by Mir-Djalali, Kai Khusrav, and funded by Chahil are either bilingual Avestan Pahlavi manuscripts or monolingual Pahlavi texts. At Chahil's explicit request, Mir-Djalali completed the Pahlavi Codex MK in Tana in 1322, and then he copied 4 other manuscripts, which you can list it here, 3 more in the year 1323, and 1 further, the Pahlavi Videvdat K1 in 1424. The manuscripts that descend from the Pahlavi, from the Pahlavi Videvdat manuscript L4 provide a 4th colophon, which is dated to the Parsi year 732, Anno Yazdegerd, which is 1363 of the Christian era. This colophon indicates that L4, which Mir-Djalali Kai Khusrav completed in 1323, was transcribed 40 years later by a Mir-Djalali. This colophon doesn't give the father's name of that Mir-Djalali, but assuming that that Mir-Djalali was the same scribe, Mir-Djalali Kai Khusrav would have made a copy of his own manuscript of 1323, 40 years later. That copy of 1363 is now lost, but copies of that copy exist, and all of them include that 4th colophon. One of those copies is the manuscript BH11, which is housed in the Bhandakar Oriental Institute of Pune. The text of that 4th colophon runs as follows. It was in the Parsi year 732 when I, accomplished in the religion, priestly born Mir-Djalali, came to the land of the Hindus, and in the town of Navsari wrote this book for Chahil Sangan of Kambad. Now here the scribe gives his name, as in the 3rd colophon, as Mir-Djalali, but he omits the name of his father. The fact that he adds that he came to the land of India at the invitation of Chahil Sangan suggests that he is the same Mir-Djalali Kai Khusrav of the previous colophon, which is the one from which was made this, which is there is a list of 4 colophons. So this one here, the previous colophon mentions the name of Mir-Djalali Kai Khusrav, and that he was still active in India in the year 1363. And then the text continues, I am desirous of the readers reading this book that they should consider Chahil worthy of an immortal soul. Chahil made the expenditure from his own wealth. Now, the words of this last sentence recall those of the colophon of Ardashir Vahuman's manuscript of 554 with regard to the payment made by Mahia Adawi from his own resources 178 years earlier on behalf of Ma Ya Mah-Mihir to have the manuscript copied that was destined to become the base text of the entire Pahlavi Vidivta tradition. In both cases, wealthy merchants used their wealth to fund the copying of manuscripts. Then the colophon of BH 11 continues by stating the purpose of the work. I am the scribe for the sake of the soul of Chahil Sangan, of immortal soul, for the sake of the soul of his own father, that paradise is the portion of the eternally immortal soul worthy of the house of welcome. By supporting the copying of manuscripts, the sponsors performed a good deed that would not only ensure that the tradition continued, but would also be added to their own personal account of good and bad deeds, which will be balanced against each other after death at the moment of the judgment of their soul. This belief is a major force that drives the activity of copying manuscripts carried out by the priests and sponsored by patrons, and it's also the source of many other charitable activities of Zoroastrians. Moreover, it was considered important that one's own name should be remembered by future generations in order to aid one's soul after death. Manuscripts were suitable means of having one's name perpetuated, as they constitute a record that enters the tradition and is handed on over generations. One of the standard formulae used in the colophons is the scribe's threat to stand as an opponent in the assembly of Isadvastar, the assembly which forms part of the universal judgment at the end of time, and there he will stand against anyone who erases his name or that of the patron from the colophon. While a reminder of the sponsor's name as well as of that of the scribe is a common feature in the colophons, the manuscripts which Mihraban copied for Chahil Sangan go beyond that by including the names and death anniversaries of 6 generations of Chahil's ancestors. This list is presumably taken from the list of names and death days in the Roznamak or Naam Grahan in Parsi Gujarati, which families used to compile. Within the priestly tradition, Mihraban Kai Husraf's name is also remembered in various Pazan texts for his merits as a scribe. Outside of it, regarding his contribution to Avestan and Pahlavi scholarship, Hodiwala aptly commented that his name may not be widely known among our people, but it does deserve and ought never to be forgotten. In addition, the names of Mada Adawi and Chahil Sangan, the 2 Behdins who funded the priests Mahya Mah-Mihir and Mehraban Kai Husraf respectively, deserve to be remembered equally. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot for this really excellent and extremely interesting presentation. And anyone who wants to ask questions is free to ask them now. Okay, Professor Toledo, yes.
So first of all, thank you, Professor Hintze, for the talk, which of course is for me specifically interesting since I'm working on the bit of that. It's perhaps a silly question, but I'm of course obliged to ask it. Do you have any guess where the very important manuscript IM could be located?
Of course, our default is always the Kama Oriental Institute, and it is perhaps it ended up there. That is where families would have given their collections. And also the collection of Dastur Hoshang in Pune is the whereabouts of his collection is only partly known. So we found DH in the Kama Atonan Institute in Mumbai, where we didn't expect it. And later on, many Zoroastrians gave their manuscripts to the Karma Oriental Institute. So maybe it is there.
Thank you.
Another manuscript which we are desperate to locate is the manuscript JJ, which is the oldest copy of MK. And that was last seen at the at the Anjuman Atesh Behram in Mumbai. And according to the records, as far as we can tell, it was donated, it was given or transferred from there to the Karma Oriental Institute. But as long as we don't have a collection, a catalog of that collection, nobody knows what is actually in there.
True, yes. So thanks for the answer. I'll take the questions in the order that I see on the screen. So Mr. Mumtaz Zadegan, you're first.
Thank you very much, Doctor. That was very interesting to listen to you. My question is that how in Zoroastrianism, hell and heaven are described? Like, for example, in Islam, hell is a place full of fire burning, and heaven is a nice garden, river, everything good. How hell and heaven are described in Zoroastrianism? Thank you.
Well, we have words for these concepts already in the Gathas, where we find Garodamana as it's described as a house of welcome, and the house of the lie, of deceit, which is where evil dwells. And the place where evil dwells is described in terms of darkness. And of course, the Garodamana is all light and best existence. It is described not so much, at least in the Avesta, in physical terms, but it's more as a spiritual concept. And this is the place where the soul goes after death to its respective places. And that's all happens on the spiritual plane, not on the bodily plane. Because until the end of time, the body, the material world, physical world is mortal, because evil is in it and death is attributed to evil. In the Zoroastrian conception, it only happens at the end of time, when the material, the physical world is going to be reinstated in perfection, and death is removed from the cosmos, from the material world, which was made by Ahura Mazda in a second stage of his creation, after he had first made the spiritual existence. And then evil is going to be removed. And then what is called, and then the existence of evil is completely eradicated from this world. And with that also the place where evil dwells, at least within this world. The place where the souls of the bad people had to be until that final time, end of time, when evil is going to be defeated. That place is going to be filled with light. At least that's how the texts talk about it. And it's going to be just one world. There is no more any evil in the world made by Ahura Mazda. And it's all going to be united. And then there will be the material existence together with the spiritual existence. So human beings will be reinstated in perfection, both in body and in their spiritual existence. But from the Zoroastrian point of view, the spiritual existence is immortal. It cannot die. And that's why we need these two respective places for the good and the evil doers, or the Daiva worshippers and the Mazda worshippers. They are relegated to their respective places after death, but it's only their spiritual being. And of course, then in later periods, in the Sasanian period, then these places are described in greater detail. We have the Arda Viras Normag, where the righteous Arda Viras, the righteous Viras, undertakes a journey to the other world to get a glimpse. And there he sees then the punishments for the evildoers and the rewards for the good ones. But in principle, that should be for their souls, not for their bodies, although the punishments are actually described in bodily terms, because it's very difficult to describe evil suffering just in spiritual terms. Although maybe someone who suffers from a mental illness, for example, can actually talk about this also in spiritual terms, but there it is described in physical terms as tortures. Just as it then goes on in European literature, in Dante's Divina Commedia and so on.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And of course, Islam has taken over a lot of these ideas, as has Christianity. These two different places for the good and the bad ones after death. These are concepts which were first conceived in the Zoroastrian tradition.
Thanks a lot for the answer. Yeah, thanks. For the question and for the answer, we have quite a few people in line to ask questions. So the first one is Karishma.
I'd like to express my gratitude to all those who have worked so tirelessly to bring us this webinar series and the work that has gone to create the departments. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Faizana. Thank you, Dr. Hintze, for sharing your knowledge so kindly. I just wanted to make a short comment and a question. The question, Professor Hintze, is this. You mentioned a triangle between God. Firstly, you use God instead of Ahura Mazda. So I wanted to ask you for your reason for doing that. The triangle consisted of God went via reward to the person who is commissioning the work and the person who carries out this work. So the question is this. In the Ashem Bahu prayer, the fundamental prayer of the Zoroastrian faith, good deeds, or to follow the path of Asha, is for the sake of doing what is right rather than for a reward. The reward is in doing the right thing itself. So this concept of reward in this triangle, to me, I would like to offer you the opportunity for clarification. That's my question. And the second thing is, it's so precious, the work that you've done, because the Vandidad is critical to the understanding of how we keep things clean and pure, the concept of Ashoi. And we all pray the Kemna Mazda prayer as Zoroastrians, which is taken part of it from the Ushtavaiti Gatha of Zarathustra. And we say, Kevretrem Zatwa Poshinga Yohenti, who shall be the smiter of the foe, the remover of evil? And the protective force comes from thy Avasta words, or thy words. So thank you for protecting these words and for telling us the history of how this Avasta Matravani has been preserved. Much gratitude.
Okay, thank you very much, Karishma, for your kind words. About your question, doing good just for the sake of good, sort of as an end in itself. Well, the Zoroastrian texts quite clearly tell us that there is an imperative to do good and to refrain from doing what is bad. So that's why you have good thoughts, good words, good deeds, as opposed to bad thoughts, bad words, bad deeds. But by doing good thoughts, good words, good deeds, they have a goal. They're not there just for their own sake, but you strengthen Ahura Mazda by doing so. And Ahura Mazda has made this world for a purpose, namely for the sake of incapacitating evil. And that's why people have to do good thought, perform good thoughts, good words, good deeds. So it does have a purpose.
Thank you very much for your comment and for helping me understand your image, and for thereby commenting on the concept of becoming a vastarin, the person who does shiot and anam, the good deeds.
Yeah, and then, oh yes, and then you said, yeah, the protection, vastarim, yim drigu biodarat vastarim, whom he gave as a herdsman for the needy, for the weak ones. And Zarathustra himself describes, Zarathustra is presented as a drigu, as a one who is in need of support. Yes. And coming back to the triangle, and you mentioned, yes, why I put there God. I try to keep it general because this triangle doesn't apply just to the Zoroastrian tradition, but it's something which has roots in the Indo-Iranian prehistoric period, because we find the same system also in the Vedic tradition of ancient India. So also there, rituals are performed, need to be funded, need to be paid for by a patron. And it goes on, in the Zoroastrian tradition, very clearly goes on the account of the patron who pays for it. And that is also the cause for the decline of the rituals nowadays, because there is much less demand. In the past, there used to be enormous demand for rituals, but that demand has declined, and that endangers the tradition, the continuation of the rituals, and also the income of the priests. So the priestly class is now quite impoverished. They can't live on just on performing rituals. In the past, they were able to do that.
Beautifully said. Dastuji Minochi Aromji was recorded by the Revetners in Chicago, clearly said, I performed the ritual to inform my mind and transform the world, bring a heaven upon this earth.
There is an inherent power in those rituals, and that is belief. They have a purpose, yes. And in fact, it is by performing the ritual is having a ritual performed accrues a lot of merit to the patron, to the account of the patron. It's the merit par excellence, so to say. It's the best way of promoting Ahura Mazda, by having the rituals performed and reciting the gathas in them.
Thank you for all your work and your dedication. Thank you for all your dedication.
Very good. So next question, Kirsi Shroff, then.
Yes, Professor Hintze, thank you so much for such a wonderful panorama of Iranian, Zoroastrian, and Parsi names. As a modern-day Parsi, I would have never recognized Chahil Sangan as a Parsi name, leave aside the fact that he was such a great benefactor of the written text of the manuscript tradition in Zoroastrianism. You also said that all manuscripts that came later came from the MK manuscripts, which makes me ask, I have a list of manuscripts that were taken by Anquetil du Perron to Europe in the 1770s from India. And it lists the Zand and Pahlavi Vendidat copied from the copy of Dastur Jamas. Would this be the same tradition of manuscripts that were then used by Anquetil du Perron and taken to Paris?
Sorry, I have just one thing to clarify here. MK is a manuscript which gives us a selection of various shorter Pahlavi texts. So it's not even an Avestan manuscript, it's a Middle Pahlavi manuscript, and it's a different type of manuscript. The ones which you are referring to are manuscripts which were then taken to Paris, and they are either of the bilingual manuscripts, that is the Yasna or the Videvdat or some other text with the Pahlavi translation, some of them with the Sanskrit translation, or they are manuscripts which describe the different rituals. And we know of 4 high rituals, solemn rituals, which is a Yasna ritual, a Visparat ritual, Videvdat ritual and the Vishtaspya ritual. And these are described in the manuscripts together with the ritual actions to be performed. So we have these different classes of manuscripts, and different manuscripts belong to different classes.
So the list that I'm looking at could possibly have traces of the MK manuscript taken to
No,
Paris?
not of the, I was unlikely.
That's
Of the MK, unless it's a copy, you know, it's a copy of some of these Pahlavi texts which are in MK.
Well, the first one is mentioned as the copy of Dastur Jamas.
Yes, yeah. Maybe you can tell me later, Kersey, what manuscript that is you're looking at.
Thank you so much.
Very good. So now, Professor Cantera, Alberto Cantera. Now, great.
Thank you, Almut, for your talk. I have two questions. One, a more general one, and the second is a very specific one. The more general one concerns the sponsorship of these two persons. Both of them refer exclusively to Pahlavi manuscripts, either Pahlavi or Avestan manuscripts with Pahlavi translation. But in the case of Sahil Sanjan, we know clearly that Mihravan-Kai Khosrow intentionally didn't copy the manuscripts copied by Rostam Mihravan, who included just descriptions of rituals. And even when copying the Yasna with Pahlavi translation, he left out the ritual instructions that were most likely still copied by Rostam Mihravan. So is this sponsorship is just accidental, that it is limited to the Pahlavi manuscripts, and that does not include liturgical manuscripts or descriptions of the rituals? This is the first question. And the specific one is all the copies that we have from L4, from this Videvdat manuscript of Mihravan-Kai Khosrow copied in Navsari. They include the fourth colophon. If the fourth colophon is also by the hand of Mihravan-Kai Khosrow, how can we know that the actual Elfia that it is in London today is the manuscript copied in 1323 and not the one copied in 1363?
Well, for the colophon of L4 is lost, isn't it?
Yeah, it is lost. So, yes, we don't know.
The colophon of L4 is lost. So this this is what we perhaps we could make an analysis of the paper